We'd like to take everything that we've collected and compile it into a book or a DVD, so again, we could share that with everyone and preserve the history of Valley View. Up on the stage here, you'll see there's a rocking chair. That chair was donated to the Historical Society by Jim Campbell, and it originated in the Campbell House. This rocking chair was one of two that, actually, there were two of them, that Jim donated to us to return back to the Campbell House. So this was very exciting for us as a group to have this major donation. And real quick, I'd like to tell you a story Jim told us. When he brought the chairs, there's this one and another one, and they were his grandma and grandpa's chairs. And when he was a youngster, along with his sister, when grandma and grandpa wanted to take a nap, he had to sit in the rocker and his sister had to sit in the rocker, and they were told, do not get up until grandma and grandpa are done with their nap. So that's one of our stories that we love to share with the Campbell House. I'd like to introduce to you our advisory board. There's 7 of us. We have Marianne Pasakowski, and if you had a chance to look at the artwork, her daughter is Stephanie Varish, who has some paintings, and her brother is Ken Marinowski, so they're our art people. And we have Dave Wiggenfeld, who is the owner of this big red barn, Ingrid Koszelski, Sue Walcher, who you'll hear from later on, Elaine Pinter, and David Berth. And I'm Joni Piasecki. This evening we have several speakers. Jean Kainzinger is a local historian from the Walton Hills Historical Society. Jean is a retired teacher of the gifted and has directed many field trips to local historic sites. We're so grateful to Jean for all the time and the many resources she's shared with us, and we thank her for being here. Our 3 other speakers are longtime residents of Valley View, and we thank them for sharing their stories tonight. Frank Goslin is retired from the Navy after 20 years and is also a retired history teacher. Frank's late grandfather, Frank Alberg Sr., is the artist who painted some of the wonderful artwork on display. These pieces read along the side here, and Frank Albrecht Sr.'s son, Frank Albrecht Jr., is sitting in the front row. Next, we were going to have, after Frank spoke, Sue Walcher. Sue's family, the Zimmermans, and her husband's family, the Walchers, go back in Valley View to the 1800s. Sue is retired from the Kaga High School system as high school secretary. And tonight, starting off, will be our host for this evening, Dave Wiggenfeld. We'd like to thank Dave and his family, and especially Danny, who is doing so much for us here tonight, and thank them for all that they did to prepare for this evening and for this amazing barn. What a perfect place to sit in this historic old barn and talk about the history of Valley View. So let's begin our Tales of Valley View, Days of Old.
Welcome to Canal Corners Farm. My children, Danny, Noah, and Megan and I have a 60-year lease. This farm has 26 acres. We grow a lot of flowers, pumpkins, vegetables, and it's actually owned by the National Park. Kaga Valley National Park owns it. We have a 60-year lease. I'll be 115 when it's up. I'm pretty optimistic. Of course, we have some porta potties. There's one behind that corn crib right there. And there's another corn crib on the side of the barn. Behind that, there's another porta potty. We recycle in Valley View, so if you look around, you'll see some red containers. And I want to thank everybody on the committee. They did a great job. I want to thank Bill Hoffman for running the lights back there. He does the theater in the barn during the summer. My son Danny's doing all the media technology stuff tonight. And want to thank the mayor. You know, when you get to be Jerry's age, you don't have much to get excited about. But he's bragging about his weed whacker, so I borrowed his weed whacker yesterday and cleaned up the whole area, so thanks, Jerry. So I want to introduce you to my cousin Jean Kainsinger. She's going to give a talk. She does a lot of historical investigations. She double and triple checks all her information, so believe me, she knows what she's talking about. Come on, Jean.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and see a lot of familiar faces. I do want to recognize Myrtle Smith, Bertie Smith. Bertie is age 93, and she's still one of the most working volunteers at the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. She's a historian, and she's their librarian. Bertie has provided a lot of information to both the Walton Hills Historical Center as well as the Valley View Center. So thank you, Bertie. And I want to recognize some of our members of our Historical Center in Walton Hills. Ruth, Money, and Kay Flesher. Thank you. Okay, the one with the circles. That's it. That's it. We think that we're the people who have founded this area, and we consider it ours. But did you know that for over 11,000 years, the Native Americans called this area theirs? And they camped here during the good months. And they were our original snowbirds. They got out of here in the winter. But we had Indians in the 10,000 BC through the 1700s. So that's over 11,000 years. Now, if you live in Valley View, all these sites that are circled are Indian either forts, settlements, campsites, or had something to do with an Indian settlement. For those of you in Walton Hills, a lot of settlements also. There were also, in the 1700s, fur traders. There was one fur trader. Oh, this is hard to see. I think this is Tinker's Creek. Right about here, there was a fur trader settlement and a tannery. And let's see, the Cuyahoga River, let's say it's here. On the west side of the Cuyahoga River by Tinker's Creek was a tannery. All right, can we get the next slide? Now you may ask, were there Indians all over the area, all over the place? No. There were Indians who used our properties near Tinker's Creek, especially by Bedford Reservation. Now you know how in Bedford Reservation there are a lot of hillsides and the rock sides going lowering down to Tinker's Creek. Well, there's salt in that area of Tinkers Creek and its tributaries, wherever there are these hillsides. And the salt seeps through the rocks, the sandstone, and the shale, and settles in Tinkers Creek. Why is that important? Well, if you're a deer or a turtle or a fish or many other kind of animals, you need salt in your diet. So what the animals did is almost daily they made trips to Tinkers Creek to get their daily supplement of salt along with clean, fresh water. If you're a fur trapper, where do you think you're going to hunt? You're going to go where the animals settle, right? If you're a Native American, just like the animals, you need salt. So you would have your summer camp near an area that's just perfect, like the hillsides around Tinkers Creek. From their reading about the 7 wonders of the world and the structures in Egypt, they probably thought back that and they called their community Little Egypt, and they called that mound Egypt Mound. You know, is it really an Indian mound? What makes it? Could it be glacial claim? What is it? Why is it like that? But because there's a grave at the top, they could never really do an adequate dig. So today we really don't know what it was. Okay, back to Moses Gleason. He and his wife Polly settled in 1810 right here. Their initial property was where the barn is, where David's house is back here, where the Sunoco station used to be, all the way to the Cuyahoga River. And somewhere right in here, they probably at first had a log cabin. They eventually had 10 kids. So maybe between the log cabin, they did some other building. But by 1840, the family was moved into a very large, for its time, very large brick house that was kind of at the corner of Tinkers Creek Road and Dunham Road. Moses Gleason was the principal landowner for this whole area of Tinkers Creek Road, around Canal Road around here, and that area in Walton Hills around Dunham Road. In about 1815, while he was living here, Moses Gleason took over a combination grist mill sawmill that wasn't making it, and he created just a grist mill, and it was a going business. Then he built a sawmill. How many of you know Hermit's Hollow Pavilion in Bedford Reservation? His sawmill was right there. And of course, Moses Cleveland built World's End, the tavern. He built the lock tender's house on Canal Road and a general store near the lock tender's house. He had farms, he raised horses, and for the family and his friends and neighbors, there was a distillery. Where the Astorhurst Golf Course is, Hillside, that was their distillery. But by 1840, Moses Gleason had moved his family into this house. Next slide. Well, as I said, the Gleasons built a shrine to their beloved son, who died at age 44 in 1854. His name was Edmund Gleason. Now it's a grave site, and there are those stones that are pictured there, but the surrounding fence is gone. There are some posts, but the posts are all kind of askew. Now, Edmund Gleason was not a healthy person. Moses Gleason had 9 healthy kids, and one who was very sickly. Perhaps it was rheumatic heart. He was in bed a lot. He caught colds a lot. Polly and Moses had him tutored, and the boy was extremely intelligent. He became a lawyer. Now, in those days, you didn't have to go to school to become a lawyer. All you had to do was be apprenticed to a lawyer. Could we go back to, okay, one more? Okay. Well, as Edmund got older, he didn't particularly want his mother hovering over him all the time. So the family hired Charlotte Comstock, a neighbor's daughter, who was 12 years younger than Edmund, to care for him, and also she worked with him when he was studying for law and when he became a lawyer. Edmund and Charlotte married when he was 38 and she was 26. Their daughter, Clara. Well, while Charlotte was taking care of her husband, who was very ill in his last 3 years, Clara was mostly in the care of Moses and Polly Gleason. And Clara loved being at their house and playing with them and riding a horse. She had a pony. And when Edmund died, Clara was 3 years old, and Charlotte was a young widow at age 32. Now, Charlotte, I'm certain, was a very attentive wife, but when Edmund died, she was ready for city life and something more than just living in maybe David's house. And by the way, Edmund probably never got to the upstairs of the house. He probably was on the first floor, and that's probably why there are those circular steps, kind of going up your second floor. Probably his father designed those so Edmund wouldn't try to go up there because he could never get down again or something. But there's no way he could have gone up and down. Well, anyway, Charlotte loved being a city lady. She thrived in Bedford. She took advantage of any invitation she had. She was invited to people's houses, and in those days, if you were invited, you stayed for a few days. You weren't invited for tea, it was for a few days. And she loved going to the women's dress store in Bedford and buying New York clothes designed in New York or that they came from New York. And she loved the theater and the music that the city of Bedford had to offer at that time. She met James Cleveland, and they married. Now, most of this time when she was in Bedford, Clara was enjoying herself at the brick house with Moses and Polly Gleason, her grandparents. So Clara was fine with it, and when Charlotte and James Cleveland got married, they took a 3-month trip to Europe, and Charlotte probably never came back to the house the stone house that's over here. Now, one thing I want to say, almost all of Edmund's property, when he was very ill and wrote his will, the papers would state, to the heirs of Edmund Gleason. So he must have had some kind of an arrangement with Charlotte. Charlotte had to know about that. And the reason the wording was, well, anyway, because the wording was to the heirs of Edmund Gleason, that's why the property now is part of the national park. If it had been written another way, it would probably be the property of James Cleveland. And the reason I say this is because there was one chunk of land that Edmund Gleason had bought that was a buffer zone. It was owned by Abner Cleveland, and his son, Clark Cleveland, ran the quarry. So you can imagine why the Gleasons would want a buffer zone to separate the noise and the disturbance of the quarry and their land. Well, just within months of James Cleveland marrying Charlotte Gleason, he sold the buffer zone to his father, and that became the quarry. So the dynamiting and the men who were indentured servants who came here from Europe, for 7 years they'd be an indentured servants. They had mining experience. They ran the mine. So all that was right abutting the Gleason property. Well, Clara Gleason grew up, and there's a story that when she completed high school, her mother, Charlotte, insisted she go to finishing school. Evidently, Charlotte wasn't too happy that her daughter was a country bumpkin. Well, Clara went to the finishing school, and during a vacation came home to the Gleason farm, and she said, "I'm finished with finishing school." Clara had a great business sense, and she then managed World's End and also the country store that was right by the lot tender's house. And that is where she met her husband, Dominic Carey. Soon after Clara and Dominic got married, Clara was 29 at the time, and they chose to make World's End their residence. Now, Dominic Carey was in the bridge construction business. So, with Clara's money and her shrewd business mind, and with Dominic's construction talents, they formed a bridge construction company that employed between 1,200 and 700 men. 1,200 men worked there during the good months, and 700 they carried through for all 12 months. They made a fortune for themselves. Newspaper articles credit Dominic Carey building the doing parts of the New York City subway. He had the job of the Sandusky Bay Causeway and the Main Street Bridge over the Ohio River going into Wheeling, West Virginia. He also built the New Groton Aqueduct in New York. That's one of the aqueducts over the canal. Well, in the late 1800s, this was just about 6 years after they got married, Dominic, who loved raising and trading racehorses, built Maplewood Stock Farm. That. So that was right at the southwest corner, right by the brick house, right in front of the brick house, corner of Dunham and Tinkers Creek Road. Dominic Carey designed this, and he employed managers to take care of the horses, to train them and get them ready, and they raced at Cranwood Racetrack and Grantwood Racetrack. So here was the oval, different horse barns over here. When Clara and Dominic's son Howard got through high school, he became the manager of the Maplewood Stock Farm. Well, tragically, when Dominic was 48 years old, he went to Wheeling, West Virginia to check on his Main Street Bridge. There had been a big storm, and he wanted to check to see if there was any damage. He drowned. So he died at age 48, and Clara became a widow at age 40. Clara and Dominic Carey had 3 sons. The oldest was LaGrange, and he died at an early age, as did, remember, Edmund Gleason? Howard was the middle son, and a lot of us know Cub Carey. Cub Carey was the youngest. Howard inherited the Walton Hills land holdings, and Cub inherited the Valley View holdings. Now I have a challenge for our Valley View friends. In Walton Hills, we have 7 generations of the Gleasons who continuously lived in the village, and we think that's a pretty good record. However, I have a strong feeling that Valley View can do this 1 or 2 better. I'll bet you there are Gleasons, and you know, when I was talking, I was only talking about the few people in one family tree. But I'll bet in Valley View there are some Gleasons that are 9th generation, or at least 8th. Maybe even so with the Campbell family. Or maybe the Comstock family. Are any of you descendants of Gleasons? Just one? I find that hard to believe. Okay, how about Comstock? Comstock? Okay, Joyce Bilecki, Comstock. Campbell? All right, just real quickly, our first generation was Moses and Polly. Second generation, there were 10 kids. Edmund was one of them. Third generation, I have Clara here. Fourth generation, I just put Howard. But remember, there was LaGrange and Cub. The next generation, Marguerite Carey. Now she too had this bad heart, and she was told never to have kids. Well, right after high school, she got pregnant, and her husband left before she had the baby, and Howard Carey and his wife Gertrude raised their grandson, 6th generation Howard Fredette, and now Jim Fredette lives in the house. So, you have a challenge, Valley View. Okay, thank you.
These two here, tracing our heritage. and historic sites in our parks. I believe she even may have written another. Her and her husband Bob, who's here this evening, wrote those together. And actually, that was our door prize, this book from Jean. They are for sale at the Walton Hills Village Hall, I believe, because Walton Hills paid for the printing of these books. And now, let's continue with Frank Goslin.
Well, good evening. I want to move a little further ahead in history. We're going to move back up to about the turn of the century, around 1900. And I'm going to take you on a journey from the beginning of the canal at the Brecksville Feeder Dam, and we're going to travel down the canal, see some of the sites, some historic photos, and we'll end up at Cauga Heights at the old pump station. And when I get done showing those slides, I'm going to talk a little bit during the presentation about a inn that most people today are not aware of that existed on Canal Road, the Valley Inn. And I want to also talk about local artists from this area that was well known in the 1960s. Some of his paintings are shown here. So just tell you briefly a little bit about myself. I'm a native of Valley View. I lived from 1954 to 58 at the Albrecht House with my grandfather. My parents bought a home in Maple Heights in 58, and we lived there until 1962, and then we moved back down the Hathaway Road in 1962, and the family's been there ever since. I bought the house off my mother in 2007, and so I'm living in the home I grew up in. Now I want to start here where the canal begins. Some of these pictures are from the collection of Louis Balls, who was a photographer around the turn of the century. Some of the pictures are from various collections that I have. Some of the pictures are from people who donated photographs to me, some of the Albrecht pictures. But as you can see here in this first picture, this is where the canal starts today, as well as years ago, when it was taken over by this section of the valley. This canal was taken over by the steel mills used for cooling water. And you notice in the background, what's missing there is the Route 82 bridge hadn't been built yet. This photograph was 1907 at the feeder dam. And it's one of the areas where the canal was fed. If we go on to the next slide, this is a house as the canal enters the valley at the beginning of Canal Road here in the south end of the valley. This was one of the first homes built in 1827. Became the home of the Stephen Frazee house, and he farmed a lot of the land on both sides of the canal and the river, and also land directly north of that, which is now part of the Johnson farm. If we go to the next photograph. This is a view looking south from Alexander Road towards the Frazee house on the canal. This is about 1900. Canal boat just south of the 14-mile lock, which was the lock 37. Next, please. This is the Alexander Mill. It was taken by around 1860. It was built in 1853. It was actually Alexander Brothers who built the sawmill at Sagamore Creek and used timbers from that sawmill to build the Alexander Mill, which went into production around 1853. Actually, Alexander Brothers sold it to a Foster. They had it for about 25 years, and then Mr. Foster sold it to Thomas Wilson in 1901. We go to the next, please. This is behind Wilson's Mill, at that time Alexander Mill, and you can see this is looking north. Right ahead of that picture would be where Fritzwater Road is. That picture was taken about 1890, Lock 37 looking north. Next. This is another picture, 1895. This is Lock 37 again looking north. Next. This is a postcard that was colorized, same picture, around 1895. Next, please. This is looking south, same lock, 1898. Alexander Mill would have been on the left. Okay, next, please. This is a picture donated by the Albrecht family, taken, we assume around 1901, probably after Wilson took over the mill. As you can see, there's a crowd of people standing on lock 37. Next. This is a view taken from the hill around 1900. This is part of the Lewis Balls collection. You can see Alexander Mill is down in the close to the right side. You can see the canal. We're looking kind of like northwest over the valley. Next, please. This is looking north, Canal Road leading up to Alexander Mill. That was taking probably around 1934. Next, please. This is a little closer view of Canal Road as it turned right before the entrance to Alexander Mill. At that time, it was Wilson's Mill, 1934. Next. You can see the road wrapped around the headed north, Fritzwater Road being on the left. There used to be a little gas station right there in the corner of Fritzwater Canal. This is also around 1934. Next, please. This picture is Wilson's Mill looking south. That's about 1942. Next, please. This is around 1966, Lock 37 looking south. Next. Here's an earlier picture taken around 1897, the Gleason House. It was listed as the Edmund Gleason House, and it was some records show that it was built by Sally Fisher, but there's no clear evidence of that. Later became the Cub Carey House, Block 38, which would be at Hillside looking south. Okay, next picture, please. This is the William Knapp home, right across the street from the Lock House at Block 37. Hillside this would be looking from Hillside. I think one of the last residents was Joe Veit's residence, and it's in pretty bad state right now, but you can see in 1930 it was in pretty good shape. Of course, this is a later picture. And William Knapp also used the basement of that home as a school for some of the Valley View kids. He taught school in his basement of that house, as well as the Johnson House on Alexander Road was also used as a school at one time. Next picture, please. This is the same section of the canal. You can see the old Hillside Road Bridge. That would be Lock 38. This would be looking south. I think this picture here was for anybody that lived in this area in the late 1950s and 1960s. There was quite a large number of chemicals being dumped into the canal and the river at that time, and quite often it was common to see soap suds flying around in the canal. Next picture, please. This is from the same point, Hillside Road Bridge, looking north. That stretch right in there, this was around 1956 as well. Okay, next picture, please. Actually, that was 1952, those two pictures. This is the way that home looked in 1966 when John Goslin bought it. The southern half with the porches became a two-family residence, 2 apartments. The front section, the north section, pretty much was undisturbed from previous years. It was locked up and hadn't been changed in probably 100 years. Next picture, please. All right, just coming north on Canal Road, there was a place called the Valley Inn around the turn of the century. And if you were to go up on the hill at Hathaway and look south towards Hillside, this was the Dr. William Knowlton farm. That whole area of land was owned by the Edgar family, but Dr. Knowlton farm had a home there, and this looks down into the Valley Inn. Next picture, please. This is a view from up on the hill looking down the backside of the Valley Inn. The Valley Inn was a popular restaurant inn around the turn of the century. There's not a lot of records on it. These pictures were donated by the Albrecht family, but Frank and Bertha Youngling operated and owned the Valley Inn sometime between probably 1905 up until about 1922. Next picture, please. This is a view from Canal Road. This is the parking area in front of the Valley Inn. The Valley Inn in the front section had a huge dance floor. My mother used to play in there along with her sister Diana when she was a child. This is probably around right before the 1920s. They served chicken dinners. They specialized in chicken dinners, and of course they also, during the 1920s, there was plenty of dancing and partying, probably during the Prohibition years as well, from the stories I was told. Next picture, please. As you can see, with about 20-some old vehicles there, with this POC sign out front, probably taken sometime before 1919. It was a very popular place to dine and party after the turn of the century. Next picture, please. This is a close-up view of the front of the Valley Inn, operated by Frank Youngling. Frank Youngling died unexpectedly in 1919. Frank and his wife Bertha had one son, Frank Youngling Jr., was born in 1911. He's the artist that of most of these paintings that you see here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Frank's life after this first slideshow presentation. Next, please. In 1922, when after Bertha Youngling's first husband died, she remarried John Albrecht, a prominent engineer from the city of Cleveland, and they built a house next door at 7039 Canal Road, which is still there today, lived in by the Albrecht family. After they built the house, Bertha Albrecht and John Albrecht sold the Valley Inn, and it was renamed the Terrace Gardens. And census records show that a Blanche Zimmerman lived there with her daughter and two sons, Jack and John Zimmerman. John Zimmerman later became the first police chief in 1937 in Valley View. Unfortunately, around 1945, the Valley Inn burnt to the ground. My mother and her sister sat on the north side of the home there and watched it burn down one night. Next picture, please. In 1917, they built the town hall. Of course, at that time it was Pleasant Valley School, and it was a great school that opened up, and a lot of the local children that had previously attended other schools in the area, such as the Red Brick Building further north of Canal Road, started attending classes at the building in 1917 on Hathaway Road. Next picture, please. This is a 1922 picture of a class out front. Next picture, please. This is, I believe, around 1923, a class again. These are all pictures donated by the Albrecht family. Next picture, please. And I think this is around 1924. Again, the class standing out front of the school building. It operated as a school building until 1941. From 1917, I'll wait till our train stops. Like I said, from about 1917 to 1941, it operated as a school. Previous to that, the Red Brick Building, which was the Foots home, from about 1903 when it was built till about 1917, was a one-room school with grades, first grade to 8. That building actually became the town hall in 1917 and remained the town hall till 1941, when this building became the Valley View Town Hall. 1937, I believe Cuyahoga Heights school systems, Valley View and Brooklyn Heights merged with the first graduating class in 1939. Next picture, please. Now we travel further up the canal from Hathaway. This is a section between Hathaway and Stone Road. This is looking south along the towpath. We had the McMillan Dry Dock section was in this area as well. This picture, I believe, is State Boat Number 1, 1902, just south of Stone Road. That's a picture by Lewis Balls. Next picture, please. This picture here is a picture taken by my late father, Ed Goslin. It shows Bales gas station, Art Bales gas station and house at Stone Road Canal. Next picture, please. This is 1948, Art Bales Corner Store. Later became Alessi's Corner Store in the 60s. And at Canal Road.
Start with is the idea of why people came to Valley View. As your first presenter said, there was salt, there was water, there was opportunity. And while floods have played a big key in the destruction of part of Valley View, and we've all had to live through them, it actually is what brought people here. It was a good agricultural community, and that's why a natural setting for people to settle and farm. The first farmers that I want to talk to you about are the Johnsons. I didn't do Wilson's Feed Mill because pretty much everybody's familiar with their history. The Eisman Johnson farm was purchased in 1880, and George Johnson Sr. married Lily Eisman in 1914. They have farmed that farm ever since. Their great-grandson is now still living on that farm. George and Lily ran a dairy, and in 1922, they bought the farm from the Eisman estate and were working it as a dairy farm, and their cows contracted tuberculosis. This involved killing the entire cow population. They had to do extensive cleaning and refurbishing of their barns and everything, and that is one of the reasons that a lot of the property on Alexander Road became available, because they had to sell part of the original farm so that they could keep their farm going. George Jr. stayed on the farm with his dad, and they were farmers. They grew the crops that they needed to produce to keep their dairy farm going. And as time passed, we talk about farmers retiring, but farmers never retire. I don't care what anybody tells you, farmers never retire. All it is the older generation stops doing the things they don't want to do. They still do part of farming that they like, but they retired from the things that they don't like the managing possibly and stuff like that. Well, in 1949, it was a very terrible, terrible winter. And I myself and my parents lived on Alexander Road. My dad was a county engineer and worked on the streets. Well, in this snowstorm, he was gone for days. My mother was home, my sister was 2, and I was 8 months old. Now, no farm family is ever short of food, but if you don't have animals, she had no milk. Our family, the Johnsons, became heroes. The snow is so bad, she hasn't seen my dad in days, and she hears a horse and a sled coming towards our house. He's bringing milk for her 2 children. And they took him because the dairy people couldn't come in and get the milk from them, and they couldn't get to the dairy. So they delivered milk wherever they could. So for the rest of my life, I always thought of George Johnson Jr. as a hero. And all of us that have grown up down here, you saw him with his straw hat. You never saw him without a straw hat. He was responsible for cleaning the canal. Alexander Road used to end at Canal Road. They built it straight up out of brick. You can imagine what this was like in the wintertime. Slippery, everything. Mr. Johnson used to go out, spread cinders along the road so that people could make it back and forth to work, make it to Canal Road, which was a major thoroughfare at the time. He would work with the canal boats and all along Canal Road, like they were talking about these snowballs that they saw with this thing. He managed to keep everything neat and clean. Education was very important to almost everyone in Valley View, and Johnson's were no exception. He wanted to be a teacher, which I only now found out in researching him that he himself was, and he was a teacher to a certain extent. He had 3 children. All 3 of them graduated from college with teaching degrees. His son Marty still lives on the farm, still doing truck gardening, and now that he is retired, he was a Brecksville teacher for years. His younger son now has moved back to the original farm and built a new house where the original farmhouse used to be. And he's a retired teacher from Columbus. So they now are both continuing this tradition. People don't give up in Valley View. That's what makes it such a special place to live. Now, one of the places that was across the street from this Johnson Farm on Alexander Road was the Glass Greenhouse. Now, it was purchased by the Glass family in 1939, 34 acres, 3 homes. They built a large greenhouse and grew nothing but tomatoes, and they were shipped to Cleveland. Most produce that was grown in Valley View was shipped to Cleveland. And the family property was sold in 1968, but many of the Glasses still live in Valley View. I just got this information, so I'm hoping to get more about that. But I do remember is that they used the cinders because it was heated by coal, the greenhouse. A lot of the cinders Mr. Johnson spread were from the Glass greenhouse. The next family heading north on Canal Road is Walcher family, which is my husband's family. Marcus Walcher came to Valley View in 1851. He was farming land along Hathaway and Canal Road. He built the original farmhouse in 1904, and he lived there until they passed away. And the land has been held by the Walchers ever since until the National Park came in and took most of the property. John Walcher married Grace Prophet in 1915, and as I said, they lived in that house. John Walcher was the first marshal of Valley View. He used to go to Bert Allen's house, and they would hold court right in Bert's living room when they were younger. He also was on the Kaga Soil Conservation Board. He was the chairman. So he was a great supporter of moving agricultural ahead. At first, they were doing the livestock. They grew their crops to feed their pigs, their cows, their chickens, and that's what they did. But as times changed, he moved into mechanizing, and he went into truck gardening, what we call truck gardening. That's produce that you would sell. In 1965, they built a market right on Canal Road, just north of Hathaway. And in 1965, the first official use of the Walcher Farm Market was to celebrate John and Grace's 50th wedding anniversary. And then in the summer, they opened their market for produce, and people came in, and that again lasted until the park came and closed them down. John and Grace had 3 sons. Harold, the youngest, stayed in the valley to work with his dad. And then taking it over, he married Ruth Foote in 1943. When Harold came back from the service in World War II, he and Jean took over running the farm. They had 4 sons, and in 1959 they moved from the original farmhouse up into what was called the Patton Farm, which is farther along Hathaway Road. They moved from the livestock, as I said, into truck farming, and they had wholesale people that they had. And in the late 1980s, the gentleman that wholesaled for them was taken ill, and he couldn't take his order, but the pumpkins were already planted. Harold never gave up at anything. Like I said, farmers don't give up. His theory was, the pumpkins are there, we're going to have to sell them. So we ended up opening up what they call pick your own pumpkin. Originally, nobody picked their own nothing, but now everybody picks everything, and that pumpkins was. Dad's favorite memory was a city lady who came with her children, and she told Dad that the best thing about it was she thought it was wonderful that he scattered those pumpkins all over the field so her kids could go and pick them. And we thought it was a wonderful idea too, because we didn't have to pick them up anymore. He sold, the park came in, took the business. He had continued to do pumpkins and corn for a few years after that. Then he retired from working at Cauga Heights Board of Education, and they moved to Florida, where they stayed their last years until Mom passed away, and then Dad moved back to Valley View. He never gave up his ties to Valley View, and he always felt that farming was a great way of life, not easy, but great, and that family was more important than life. Now I want to go a little farther north, up to the Foot Farm. I have in-laws, I have all this history in Valley View. You're gonna find out, I was a Zimmer, we had about this much history. But the Foots is an old established family. Louis and Eunice Fay Foot moved into Valley View in 1917. They moved on to their 80-acre farm, which is along Canal Road, north of Rockside. They raised 7 children there and have had varied types of produce that they grew on the farm. In addition to his farm, Louis Foot was an excellent manager, and this was recognized by Cleveland Growers, the chief market in Cleveland for fresh produce. And they hired him, and he worked for over 25 years managing their business for them. They were having a very difficult time. But as I said, he always had farming at heart. 3 o'clock in the morning, he went down to market, stayed there, and then he would come home, and he worked with his children on that farm. He had 4 sons and 3 daughters. They raised parsnips, squash, rhubarb, and then, because of his Cleveland connection, came home with a new crop, Italian crop. They grew broccoli. I never really thought about that as being an Italian crop, but that's where he came home, and it became a major crop for them. In most homes in Valley View, women did much more than take care of their own families. They, of course, cleaned, cooked meals, washed dishes, washed and ironed clothes, but they also made most of the clothes that their kids wore. Everyone, they did their housewares, their curtains, their home decor. Cooking for a farm wife did not include just feeding your family, because full course meals were fed to all people who worked on your farm. So she could be doing 15, 20 people. And a meal always included home-baked bread, pies, cakes. There's not a meal without dessert, and they keep going. They also kept a kitchen garden, and that means from planting all the way through canning so that you had things in the winter. And if there was a little overabundance, she got to sell it, and that was her pin money. Very important thing to a lady, pin money. Then she kept the chickens. Now she kept chickens for the eggs, for the meat for her own table, and again, overabundance. And if she was lucky enough to take some orders during the day, she might have a little more pin money. Now, what did she do with PIN money? There were women's organizations in Valley View. There was the Valley View Ladies Social Club. They met once a month. They had a business meeting in which they decided what they were going to spend this PIN money on, because they had little bitty dues, and usually it involved, at first, they were taking and helping soldiers and soldiers' families during World War II. Then they moved into helping people who were suffering because of floods or fires or anything like that. No, they got the good. That's the good part. Then after that, there was a full-out dinner. They fed themselves very well once a month, and they took turns, and you would go. Sometimes it was turkey dinner, sometimes it was ham, sometimes it was pork. I mean, we're talking big-time food because everybody's showing off because you only get to do this once a month. Then they played cards. I don't know how familiar you are, but Valley View, playing cards is a big deal. And how they raised their big funds for their causes was they would have these card parties. And these card parties would attract 100 to 125 people from Valley View, some from Walton Hills. Independence was a big place. And they would come down, play cards, and all of the proceeds from those card parties were used to help people in the villages. Another ladies' organization that we can be very proud of was the Valley Auxiliary, Valley View Fire Department Auxiliary. Now these ladies were there to support the men because they were volunteers, so there weren't a whole lot of funds for them to take care of people who were working there. They might need equipment, clothing, anything like that for the firemen. Anything that they had in abundance from their work, they used to help victims of flooding and fires. So they have always been part of the support system in here. Again, the women were very instrumental in education. It just follows that they are the leaders in the PTA and all of the functions in the school. We can say that the women of Valley View are a quiet driving force that makes Valley View what it is today. And I would like to have read you a letter. I don't know how many of you know, but we had a tornado that went through, well, we actually had two. We had a tornado that went through the Johnson farm in I think it was 1982. And Adele wrote a very touching account, in 1983 it was. And she talks about how they were trapped in their home. And I remember going to see the house after they did. It blew out the windows and glass. She and the two girls were trapped underneath the kitchen table because that's where they went for safety. Her husband, Marty, had just gotten home from school, so he was changing in the bedroom and got locked in by the pressure. Now, she says it seemed like hours, but it was just a matter of seconds. But it uprooted a 40-year-old tree, and if you walked to their hillside, you could see a path as clear as day coming from Independence down across their farm, and there wasn't a tree standing. We can take such pride in the history that we have here, and I hope that we can add to these stories. We would love for anything like that. And see, you don't have to be special. We just want to know what you remember from what your parents, your grandparents told you, because that's the real feel of Valley View. Valley View is a community of people, and only the people make the difference. There are farmers, other places, but Valley View is special because of the people that live here. I wish I had more stories for you, but this is all I had, and you've been so kind to sit with us this long. And I'll turn it back to Joni.
Thank you all for coming. This means so much to us. Obviously, you're interested, and we are, and that's why we keep working on it. So if we all work together, maybe we can get that book published and share it with all of you.